So today I'm going to be walking along the old B&M Railroad, which is located in Bethlehem, New Hampshire. And you see it says B&M. B&M is this line right here, and that tiny little black line is the Medusa River. You see here, it crosses over the Medusa River. That's as far as I'm going to be walking since the bridge is out. And here is kind of developed now into neighborhoods. But I'm going to start my walk here. I'm going to do like a 2-mile stretch starting at the highway, like here. And I'm going to walk down and look for stuff. Here's part of an old ancient wheelbarrow the railroad probably used. This is where the handles would go. And this thing is so heavy. After all these years, it's still here. But the handle's completely rusted away. Now here is another telegraph line. Well, pieces of it anyways. I don't know where the pole is, but you see these? This here would be on the pole. These would both be curved in like this, be attached to the pole, just like a modern telephone pole. And it would have these wooden pegs with the glass terminals that would hold the wires. And it looks like there's a whole bunch of them here because, you know, back in the day, new telephone poles only have one piece of wood at the top, but these are the ones, like you see in old pictures, they had like up maybe 5 planks for telegraphs. And don't quote me on this. This might be steel telegraph wire, possibly. It's not that rusted, you see, because it's galvanized, but that's also galvanized, that piece. I've come across another culvert pipe that still works. You see it? Buried beneath this tree. It's still working. Goes underneath the train tracks, and it comes out on this side. Isn't that sound nice? All the tree singing. And here you can see the ground is very trampled. That's because the deer love hanging out here. Occasionally I scare them away. They're laying down here in the grass. Last time I was out here, I was able to walk on this pond just a couple weeks ago. This is the beaver pond. The beavers come in and out of this water so much that they make this trail. And the beavers are very active, even in the wintertime, surprisingly. On one of my trail cameras, there was a beaver walking around during a snowstorm. I thought to myself, how does the beaver get out of the pond when it's frozen? They must have a tunnel coming up through the ground somewhere. That sounds really nice, really loud. Now up here, okay, this is their dam, the beaver dam, because there is a culvert pipe coming out underneath here. You see that there's a concrete. Okay, you see where it's coming out? There is still a lot of water coming out of it, even though they dammed it up. This is another known crossing where the beavers constantly walk across in the summertime. And coming up is the beaver's home, the lodge. It's right here, and it is still very active. Maybe this is how the beavers come out in the wintertime. Any of these holes. Now, as soon as I get past the beaver's swamp, the train track starts to open up again. Look at that. That, I'm guessing, was woodpeckers trying to get at the insects eating this tree. That there is called a witch's broom. When a whole bunch of branches start growing like crazy, they grow so fast and close together, it kills itself because sun can't get to all the branches. Now I'm gonna walk a little bit further because there's a very intact telegraph pole, but pretty much that's all the remnants of this railroad you'll find, except the train station. That is the most intact thing out here. That train station's a few miles behind me. I'll show that in a future video. And if I was to walk probably another half an hour ahead of me, it continues like this to be very open. There's a couple more culvert pipes, like there's one here somewhere, allowing the water to pass through. But if I was to continue a half an hour up ahead, I'd have to stop because I'd run into the river. There used to be a big train trestle, but it was scrapped for its metal. So you gotta stop. And on the other side of it, like I said, it's a neighborhood now. So not much you can do. Now, what are those birds? What do you call those? Oh, I see them. They're wood ducks. I was thinking they were something else. Well, thanks for watching. Hope this video was interesting. This thing here, I believe, was a hookup for the steam train. This was used to pump water from the river into their boiler. Okay, here I am at the tracks. That is where the highway is. This was made by people to get down here with their ATVs. This is where the tracks actually would have been. They would have crossed the street right up there. This is where the tracks would have been. This was built back in the 1860s and it was torn up in the 1920s. I'm going to show some small clips of remnants of the railway. I'm obviously not going to record the entire walk because that would be kind of boring. First thing, and this has nothing to do with the railway, there's a really old sink out here. This is back when you had a separate tap for your cold and a separate tap for your hot water. And here in this dip, obviously when the train track used to be here, there was probably a culvert pipe underneath here. And literally last week there was a foot of snow on the ground. It's been pretty warm here in New Hampshire, and this completely filled up. It's like a full-size pond now. There's a few ducks in there. Very rarely that is filled up. I'm thinking the ground is still frozen and that's why that filled up. Usually that's more of a marshland. I know in the summertime there's a whole bunch of cattails and stuff. Like you see all this plant growth. That's never water. There's just a little bit of water usually in the back. But you see here how well maintained it is. It actually looks like a road. This is because people use the first half mile or so for their ATVs and stuff like that. But as soon as you get down a little bit, what happened was a big tree fell over years ago. People stopped maintaining it, so it's just a walking trail, and you can find some things like here. That's a railroad tie. There's another railroad tie. So if you were driving a car down here, it would be bump, bump, bump. Oh, you saw that? That tree just randomly fell over. I missed it, but about a half hour ago, there was a moose. I didn't get it on camera though. That's another railroad tie right there. Railroad tie. Here's another railroad tie. In the 1920s, these ties were torn up, which means these are from the 1800s. Because I doubt in the 50 years of this railroad's life that they would have been replacing. So it's not even that rotted. So imagine the nasty preservatives they must have put when they were doing the pressure treating process. All that creosote they must have used. About 200 feet further, the pond has come to its end, and you see there's a few trees laying across the road, and this is the start of it. Those trees, if nobody cuts those up with a chainsaw soon, this is just going to keep growing in. Now, off to the right, you see this ditch. The train company made this ditch to drain the area. And I actually want to walk down there right now and show there's a lot of nice rock walls that the train company built to keep the track up. I'm just in the woods now off to the side. This flat platform is where the railway once rode. This is another drainage ditch that was created by the train company. More preserved railroad ties. There's more ties. And you see, obviously nobody uses this anymore for their ATVs. It's strictly just a walking trail at this point. Alongside, next to me, is the Medusa River. It is pretty high today. It's coming down from flood stage yesterday. It got to about 8 feet. Its average is about 3 feet. I've seen it as low as 1.5 feet. I've seen it as high as 14 feet. When it's at 14 feet, it's a bit scary to be near. And this is becoming a kind of a muddy area. Also, right here in front of me is a culvert from the train company, and it's still being used today. After all these years, it hasn't clogged up. Let me sneak in there and show it. Okay, another few hundred feet down the track, you can see the trail has really shrunk. And now this trail is mostly used by animals. A few people walk it, but it's mostly animals. There's lots of coyote out here, deer, moose, and there's still a little bit of snow right here and ice because this is a pretty cool spot. It doesn't get any sun, blocked by the hillside. Now this river does get quite high. I have been here before when this has been flooded out. For the past 10 minutes or so, I've been off the train tracks because it's just too overgrown, so the trail's off to the side. I'm finally meeting back up with it. And those are moose tracks. So possibly I might see that moose again. That moose that ran away from me like I mentioned earlier. Now this is the railroad again. You can clearly see how it's carved out. More moose tracks. Oh, and take a look at these ties. These ones are well preserved. Take a look at that. That's not even rotting. It's just covered in moss. Well preserved back then. And this is rotted wood too. So it looks like the train company tried to make a small wood bridge, I guess you could call it, for water to pass underneath. Here's another well-preserved tie. All the ties, they left them all. Now here there's some metal piping. Had something to do with the train company. Now this part of the tracks, you could tell there was a massive blowdown of trees during the storm. Look at that rail. That whole tie got just lifted right out of the ground when that tree fell over. And like I said, last week there was about a foot of snow on the ground, and that ice is still super strong. I'm not really worried about falling in. I've been here in the summertime. This is just pretty much muck. I wouldn't go far, but I want to be able to show this. Here's where the railway would have been, and there must have been a bridge here, or at least a culvert pipe, because now you have a trickling stream going through there. Now the railway is going into dense moose territory. This is where you'd find moose. There's a whole bunch of mud on both sides. This is the kind of place the moose would be, especially in the summertime. There's a lot of green plants in the swamp that they like to eat. Now this tree's fallen down in the past month since I've been here, so now I gotta kind of duck beneath that. And this trail here is mostly here because of the moose. There's a massive amount of moose. You see all the footprints out there in that muck, rusty muck? That's all moose. As I'm looking at the ground, I see their droppings, I see their footprints everywhere. There's still a good amount of ice out here. Hey, there's a little woodpecker. Now this is one of their communication lines, probably telegraph. You see that? It's been preserved by this creosote. You see what happened? The inside rotted because the creosote didn't sink into the pole that far, but the outer shell got left because that's where the preservative is. Now I just had to go for a little walk. This is the track down there. It's covered in trees, so I had to take a little detour up and around. This train must have been very scenic for the passengers that used to take it, because it follows this river for quite a long time. Now, there's some things coming up. This here, it looks like maybe a piece of an old culvert pipe that got torn up. I'm about to enter another swamp. Up, moose tracks. And this one is thawing. Now these trains back then, this was a jointed rail, and I've come down here with a metal detector before, and I have found things like tie plates, lots of spikes, severely rusted spikes. Now here, I've come to the first bridge. And after all these years, it's still being used. And it looks like it's in great condition. Nice granite. Let's continue and walk right over it. Now I'm gonna get off the railway for a second. I'll give you a brief look at this old car, which is from the same era as this train company. I'd say that's probably from the 20s, right? That old mangled car, covered in bullet holes. Those are some old bumpers. Now it's starting to get grown in again. This is very difficult to walk this area during the summertime because you're gonna get ticks all over you. Here's another abandoned vehicle. I've showed these before on my channel. This here, super old car. And it's so old that, take a look at the wheels. It had wooden spokes. wooden spokes on the vehicle. And this tire on the back of it, that is not from the car. They didn't have tires like that back then. It's a studded tire.